Hello and welcome to the next episode of Cylinder Radio. I am your host, Will Roosh, high school teacher in Los Angeles, using this platform to try and flush out nuance about a whole bunch of different controversial topics. My guest today is a writer and editor at large at the Jewish Journal and is a former professor of literary and cultural studies. And her name is Monica Osborne. Monica, thank you so much for coming here. I'm excited for this conversation.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so you showed up on my radar after I read a piece of yours that kind of went a little viral in like my circles, my heterodox circles, and my education circles. That was titled "Why Teachers Can't Be Activists." So I saw the title and I go, "Oh, okay. Now here's some confirmation bias that I'm gonna love." Because the way I approached this was always this idea of education and activism are almost like diametrically opposed, because education by definition, you don't know the answer and you're looking for it. And activism by definition is you know what the answer is. It's just now you have to go out and implement that into the world. And those always felt very opposed to me. Your article, I really recommend that people check it out. It's a quick read, but it hits on a lot of points that I've been trying to use these platforms that I have, social media and stuff, for years to talk about. But can you just bring us into a little bit about what prompted you to write that, as well as like what the kind of the gist of it is on your end?
Sure. Well, I have to say that part of the impetus for writing the piece was my own personal experience with this. I have a 9-year-old son, and a couple of years ago, he was in a school, a private school in Hollywood, Southern California. And the school became very much about activism before academics. And they weren't ashamed to say that. They weren't ashamed to put that out there. We are activists first. I remember my son was in second grade at the time. And, a third of the kids in second grade really couldn't read, but they were mini activists, and that was all that mattered. And I became very frustrated with that, especially with my background as a literature and cultural studies and philosophy and literary theory professor. What my whole career has been about is teaching people how to think and not what to think. And I found that what was happening in my son's elementary school and a number of other elementary schools, right? We're not talking about high schools, we're talking about elementary schools. Children were being taught what to think, and it was a very politically charged what, right? They were being taught to embrace progressive ideals. And, in some cases, maybe that's a good thing, right? I think that often in progressive circles, we find, people who care very much about social justice and about civil rights, not all of these things. And that's really, really important. But what was happening in my son's school and what's been happening in so many other schools goes far beyond social justice. And so that was a big problem for me.
Yeah, I'm gonna kind of push back, not against you, but just this idea. Is it really about social justice, or is it about a virtue signaling broadcast of self-satisfaction and how you're the moral one? The reason I ask that is I've had many conversations with activists on the left, critical race theory, critical theorist types. And I bring up the war on drugs a lot, because I say the war on drugs, when the way that it's been broken down from John Ehrlichman saying this is a way for us to basically lock up black and brown people and potential communists and hippies and stuff. And then you look at the mass incarceration, you look at the unequal application of sentences and stuff like that. And I think you could use critical race theory to say, well, the war on drugs is a racist policy that we've adopted that isn't racist on its front. And I go, that's a great example. So let's fix this. And over and over and over again, I get told, no, that's too specific. No. And that's I feel like it's almost not about actually changing anything. It's almost like and no offense to her, truly, but like the Greta Thunberg idea of shame on you, shame. Well, what do we do? How do we solve this? Let's get in, let's roll up our sleeves, let's get our hands dirty to try and solve these problems. No, it's not. Is it really about social justice and getting social justice? Or is it just about saying, I care? Hey, the whole world needs to know that I care. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think that there isn't a simple answer because I think it's both. I think it's complicated. I think for some people, they're very much concerned about social justice. They're very much concerned about doing the right thing, about being a change for, a force of positive change in the world. Those people do exist and they are in these circles. But I tend to think that a larger percentage of these people, for them, it is very much about virtue signaling. It's very much about moralizing, right? And I think that, so many of these progressive tenets have become somewhat of a religion now, right? There's a script. And if you veer off script, you run the risk of being called a racist, or any one of these horrible terms that are thrown about like confetti, basically. And so nobody wants to go off script, and I think that that's part of the problem.
Yeah, like the question I have, because I understand why teachers, and I've had several teachers, like activists, national teachers of the year, come on and talk about like, well, we have to fix these problems. We have to go out and we have to do this. And my question is always, how do you know that your solution is the solution? Like, how do you know that for certain? Because I have a whole unit in my civics course where I have my students research and then contemplate unintended consequences. So let's solve this, and then the whatever they use to solve it actually could make it like a perverse unintended consequence that makes the problem worse. Okay, or a
Right.
negative one. So how have you thought about all the ways that it could be gone, that it could go awry, that it could spiral off? How are you so certain that your way is the right way?
Well, and this is the big problem here, right? Because there's no dialogue. Because if you have a dialogue, you're going to get different approaches to the same problem, and you're going to have to discuss them. You're going to have to debate them. You're going to have to think about the logical consequences for each approach, right? But nobody wants to do that. We're essentially addicted to either or binaries, right? It's either this or it's this. But what if it's elements from this and elements from that? What if it takes coming together? What if it takes piecing an approach together from different approaches, right? But nobody wants to do that because that takes critical thinking, and nobody wants to do that. That is not popular right now.
What was the reaction? So this article was printed in the Jewish Journal.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that the readership is the Jewish community. How much does it branch out from there?
No, it's definitely not just the Jewish community. Obviously, the print readership in Los Angeles is very Jewish,
Mhm.
but in terms of the online readership, it's quite broad actually, and especially pieces like this that tap into, some of these components of the culture wars,
Yeah.
right? Those often go viral, and those are being read not just by the Jewish community, but by everybody.
So what was the reaction that you got from the Jewish community, but then also just broadly? Did you get a lot of hate? Were you getting a lot of support? Was it? I'm sure it's a mixed bag, but
It was a mixed bag. Yeah, it's interesting. And I've written a lot about this, and I started writing about it a couple of years ago when I was, burned by some of this at my son's school in Hollywood. And, even at that time, it was a very progressive, very political school, very, very progressive.
Mm.
Um, I had parents write to me from the school secretly and or privately and say, I really appreciate what you wrote. I totally agree with you. I can't say it publicly. I can't say it. Right. So there are these things that we can and can't say. And one of the things that I found is so many people, most people, I think, in the US are more moderate than the media representations of the culture wars would have us believe, right? I think most people are a little closer to the center than they are, the extreme left or the extreme right. But not everybody realizes that. I think a lot of people think that, everybody is more extreme than them and they have to kind of go along with it. So, I got, a lot of people were thrilled that I wrote it, but then there were people who, even some of my own friends, especially some of my former academic friends, my current friends, but, from my former academic life, they were a little upset by the idea that teachers can't be activists, because again, I come from the world of literary theory, critical theory, and philosophy. And, the idea that teaching is activism is a very popular idea in these circles. And, what I said to some of them is that teaching can still be activism, right? If we think about activism as very broadly defined as about, right now, I'd say teaching critical thought is activism, right? Because it's not the mainstream, or what would seem to be the mainstream agenda right now, to teach students how to think instead of what to think. That feels like activism right now to me. So I think it's not that teaching isn't activism, but that teachers can't be political activists in the classroom, because political activism is not education, it's indoctrination. And, I think that a good teacher really doesn't want to indoctrinate students. I think that if a teacher or a professor teaches students how to think critically and thoughtfully and carefully, it may lead them to a certain brand of activism, but that's going to be a very authentic brand of activism, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Then they're going to arrive there on their own terms, and
Right.
therefore they're going to be actually they're not just like parroting certain things or playing like the role of something. Teachers are just they get into education. We get into education because we want to make the world a better place. I mean, I get it, and you really believe that this is making the world a better place, but you have to challenge that. You have to, as I always say, seek disconfirmation. You have to go, what could I possibly be wrong about? And that takes a pride swallowing, kind of ego dissolving process. But I think more teachers need to do that, just because they're going to have some blind spots.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I used to teach, I taught it at UCLA and I taught it at Pepperdine University. I taught critical theory, literary theory. And in that class, I taught critical race theory. I taught Marxist theory. I taught feminist theory. I taught gender theory. I taught, new criticism, everything, post-colonial literary theory. I taught all of them. And what I would do is I would have all of the students read one novel, the same novel, and they would all choose a theory or a lens to read the novel through, okay, through which to read the novel. So they're all reading the same story, but they're all using a different lens. And then they would give presentations on their readings of the novel. And what I wanted students to see is that even when you're all having the same experience, the lens that you're using changes everything. And the second thing I wanted them to see was that, maybe I wanted to use the feminist criticism, feminist theory, but maybe someone else wanted to use Marxist. So if I'm thinking of the text through the feminist literary theory lens, but someone else up there is talking about critical race theory, I start to say, oh, I didn't think about that moment in the text or the story that way, because I had only been using my lens. And so, really, I think that exercises like these are really, really important, because they show us that there are so many valid ways to see the same situation, to see the same issue, the same story, the same scenario.
I'll tip my cap to you. That's a great lesson plan. That's excellent. That's something I would do. Like it's I don't like this whole thing of like get rid of Ibram Kendi. It's like, no, not just get rid of Ibram Kendi. Let's bring in Ibram Kendi and then bring in, someone, Helen Pluckrose's book or something like that counters it, and then wrestle with the both of them. Like these lenses are so important. And then you can look at it and go, wow, there's all these different perspectives on this one book that I didn't see before. And what a great opportunity to show that viewpoint diversity. That's great. I love it.
Exactly. And, a lot of people have said, oh, well, you must oppose critical theory being taught. And I say, no, I don't. I think that critical race theory, I think that critical race theory needs a seat at the table, but it shouldn't have all the seats,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
There are a lot of seats at that table, and they all need to be filled by a different perspective. And all of these perspectives need to be in dialogue with each other. And that's the difference, right? That's doing away with either this or that mentality that is dumbing down American minds, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I was brought on like Fox News, like evening news one time. They pulled a van up to my house. In fact, it would be on Fox. And one of the things that was on this panel, it was really a strange experience, but I was on this panel and one of the guys on the panel was like, this is complete and utter nonsense and just has no, and I was like, no, like, hold on. It's one view And then there's a whole bunch of others. Like, I'm with you 100%. Like, it's not complete nonsense. I just used the example with the war on drugs. It's not. But choosing to dive into these culture wars, Monica, like, that takes courage. What makes you willing to do it when many of your peers, even the ones who see the same things you do, they are scared to speak out? Why are you speaking out and they are not, do you think?
That's it's a really interesting question. And I've lost a few friends over this. I had a piece in Newsweek that um, one of my friends, she was a very good friend. She didn't like it. And so, I mean, she dropped me. And this was a very, very close friend. She completely dropped me. And, I was devastated because I thought that I was arguing for, a centrist kind of perspective. And, let's get rid of these extremes and let's come together and let's have a dialogue. But she said, you're not helping. You need to get on the right side of things. And I was like, okay, so this is what's going to happen. And it crushed me, but it also made me realize how important it is that people speak out. And I think also just seeing how fearful some people are. I'm just kind of a fearless person, I guess. And I also it's my personality. I get fixated and obsessed with things. If I see that there's truth over there, I have to pursue it no matter what the cost. So I think some of it is it's just how I am, I just what I do. But again, once I started seeing the fallout, I realized just how important it was. And, after the first piece I wrote about it, I realized, wow, the damage is done. I might as well just go all the way now.
Yeah. Do you think that uh working for the Jewish Journal has made it more possible? More, is there some protection in that? And I'll explain why I asked that question, because it has to do with me and my career trajectory. But do you think the fact that you're at the Jewish Journal and you're not at New York Times, is that allows you to do things that you wouldn't be able to do? Would that be accurate, or what do you think?
I don't know about that. The Jewish Journal features pieces from, all sides of the political spectrum.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've been affiliated with the Journal for a long time. I started writing for them years ago. And so I have had a little bit of freedom there to write the things I want. But, again, some of my pieces that have gone more viral and have, invoked more rage against me have been for places like Newsweek and, places like that. So I don't know. I don't really know how to answer that question.
Okay. Well, maybe it's just getting me to my career trajectory is very strange, because I was teaching LA Unified charter schools pretty much when I moved out to LA for about 6 years, East LA and in the Valley, and then I just couldn't teach the way that I felt I needed to teach, and I ended up at a modern Orthodox Jewish school, which was very strange for me because I'm not a member of the community. I'm not Jewish. I never stepped foot in a private school ever. So like, it was very new. But what I found was that gave me freedom, not just to teach my way, but to speak about things that most other teachers can't speak about. I have a lot of colleagues who are at LAUSD. I have colleagues that are at the hoity-toity private schools around LA, like Harvard Westlake and Crossroads and Oak Tree or whatever that Oakwood, places like that, and they are terrified to speak against the left critical theory stuff. They truly believe that if it was found out that they voted Republican in some small election, that they would get fired. And it's interesting because there's something in the community that I have witnessed that is a pursuit of truth. And there was a woman named Megan Phelps Roper. She was born into the Westboro Baptist Church, that organizations like God Hates Fags, and they go out to like funerals and stuff. Really horrible people. She was born into that. And what got her out was a modern Orthodox rabbi on Twitter that just started asking her simple questions and opened her mind up to kind of get her out. I don't get poison ivy. Like, I don't get it. Like, I could get poison ivy leaf and rub it on my face and I don't get it. My dad doesn't get it. My sister doesn't get it. So when we were kids, if a ball would roll into the poison ivy, it'd be like, all right, Roosh, go in and get it. And I go get it. To some degree, that's the way I feel. And it's largely because I am teaching at a modern Orthodox Jewish school. And I have gotten letters sent to that school about how they employ a racist, sexist, anti Semitic, homophobic, terrible person. And the administration crumbles it up, throws it away, and says, we know what you're doing. We know who you are. Keep going. That is so rare. It is like a handful of schools around the country, maybe. And because of that, I have dozens every week. I have dozens of teachers in my network saying, thank you for speaking up because I would get fired. So I feel like I'm kind of, not that I'm more courageous because my job is pretty secure. But I'm able to speak on behalf of people, and I can be their mouthpiece, even for things like this podcast. But that is, I find it directly connected to the Jewish community in Los Angeles. What are your thoughts? Is that accurate assessment of the community from what you've seen? Because you were a part of that community when you were living stateside and things like that. Is that just a like an interpretation I have of my situation, or would you say that there's accurate elements of that?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I'm sure you know that questioning is built into the Jewish tradition, right? There's no either or. I mean, if you look at a page of Talmud, right, just visually, you see that it's all of these different perspectives commenting on one passage of Torah, right? And this is the tradition that is celebrated within Judaism, the idea of questioning, the idea of interrogating a text, the idea of turning an idea, turning it, trying to see every single side of it, right? This is what it means to be Jewish, I think, very much. It's Judaism is very much about the process as opposed to the product, right? If you think about a process, it's something that's ongoing. It's always moving. It's always changing. Maybe it's always evolving, but a product, it's done, it's finished, slap a piece of museum glass over it and stare at it, right? There's nothing dynamic about a product. So it's very much about the process. It's very much about questions being more important than answers, right? But this, whole binary that's now set up in many progressive circles on the far left is very much about either this or that. And I think that that's very antithetical to the Jewish tradition. So I think there is something there. There's definitely something to, you being in a Jewish community. That said, there are also, especially in Los Angeles, you happen to be in a modern Orthodox community, but, if you look at a lot of Reform communities or, Reconstructionist communities, a lot of these Jewish communities are a lot more progressive, right? And Jews, by and large, for the most part, identify as Democrats, right? Jews are liberals, by and large. Obviously there are many conservatives among us too, but most Jews, the majority, identify as Democrats or liberals. I think that, again, especially in Los Angeles, you do have pockets of Jews that are, Jews were very involved in the civil rights movement, right? So fighting racism and sexism and, all of these other isms is really important to Jews, especially the Jews of Los Angeles, I would say. And, I think when we start thinking about the idea of intersectionality, right, this term that gets thrown about everywhere, I think that, Jews who are very concerned about social justice, they want to be on the right side of things. Yeah. And I think that so many Jews have taken, maybe let issues like anti-Semitism kind of take a back seat because they want to fight against racism. They want to be in these progressive circles. And they're just now starting to realize that their progressive friends don't always show up for them in the way that our communities are showing up for progressive causes. So I think it's really complicated. I think that Jews love dialogue. I think that Jews love debate. I think that, what's the joke? You've got 10 Jews in a room and 1,000 different opinions. So this is part of what it means to be Jewish. So I have no doubt that is one of the things that enables you to do the really good work you're doing, because you're given that freedom, you're given that space, because we respect that.
Yeah, that whole process. And I have parents that disagree with some of the things that I put out there, but it's like my process is like, all right, well, let's talk about it. What do we disagree about? Let's always have this dialogue. And that's just something really beautiful about the community and the culture that I want to try and grow to other cultures that I taught in several like 0% white schools that were like predominantly black schools or predominantly Hispanic schools specifically. And I was like, there's a lot of elements that I'm seeing in this Jewish community that we can bring in and adopt. I mean, even just elements like being off of technology for 24 hours once a week is tremendously beneficial. The process of what happens when someone close to you dies, when a parent, a sibling, or a child dies, there's the whole sitting Shiva, I believe it's something, right?
Yeah.
It's like you have to mourn. Like you have to just cry and mourn, let people take care of you. There's so many elements that I just go, wow, this is really good stuff. How can we try and grow this beyond just this one kind of isolated culture to other places? And education is definitely one of them. But there's a lot of things that I've seen that I just go, oh man, I wish that could be adopted in like my own household, and other places. So it's very interesting that I ended up at a school like this in this community.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do we use this process that you and I are both in to have these dialogues to encourage people to push back and work this all out? How do we get through this? Where do you think this is headed? Because there's some wild things going on in the classroom, but also just in society in these culture wars. My concern, I just watched something today about this person who was like gender fluid, and they met with the president, and they were kind of talking about kind of some kind of interesting, kind of wild stuff. And I was like, ugh, like we need to figure this out, because my concern is that if we don't recognize the unreasonable, crazy stuff. I've had many trans people on the podcast. I'm not talking about being trans. I'm talking about there are elements that are lumped in with this trans movement that are really off for some sort of reason. And I'm worried that if people in the center, because I agree with you, I talk to Uber drivers and everybody, like most people are in the center. If the people in the center, they're too scared to say anything. If they don't say something, then it's only going to be the Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh, people on the right that are calling it out. Then people are going to go to the right, and the reaction. I think Ben Shapiro's smart. Candace Owens is smart, sure, but the way that they approach these topics, I do not agree with. I don't like it. I don't like leftist tears. Facts don't care about your feelings. I don't like that approach personally. But if they're the only ones calling it out, then the reasonable people are going to go say, here you go, here's my vote. And then all of a sudden now we have right-wing, more authoritarian, perhaps, reactions to these things. That's my concern. So how do we move forward with getting the middle to kind of call out the negative extremes within the left? Because we know the extremes on the right, and we call those out pretty harshly. Hopefully, I think the average people do, but the ones on the left, because it's so tied in with being like kind and empathetic and a good person, that they're scared to do that. How do we figure this thing out? What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, that's the big question, right? Because we're seeing it happen right before our eyes, the extremism of the left, the far left, the progressives, however you want to define it, has justifiably scared a lot of people off and has pushed them right. And as you say, if it's only the more extreme voices on the right who are calling it out, well, that's what happens. That's where they go. And then we're just going to swing. It's a pendulum back and forth between extreme left, extreme right, extreme left, extreme right. And that's not even representative of the vast majority of people in the US. So it's a big problem. And I think that one of the things I found is that, I identify as a liberal. I do. And I think that's why I was so upset by some of the things that I was seeing. I've always been a left of center kind of person. And I was very upset by some of the things that I was seeing in my own backyard, essentially. And I felt that I needed to speak up and that I had the right to help clean up my own backyard. And I think that is what people need to realize, right? That it's okay to criticize your own party. It's okay to criticize your own group. You have to do it. You have to do it. You can't pretend it doesn't exist, right? So if you're on the left, you can't pretend anti-Semitism only exists on the right, because we know that it exists on the left, right? We know that it's everywhere. You can't pretend that racism exists only in one camp and not in another, right? And people have to be willing to criticize or to identify or acknowledge the flaws in their own ideologies in order to make them better, in order to make them stronger, right? So when I would call out something on the left, I had somebody on Twitter was tweeting all over the place. This is, a year and a half or two ago, about how, Monica Osborne, she's a known right-wing activist. And I was like, no, I'm not. I mean, no, maybe my family would like to hear that, but it's just not the truth. And, but it was because as a liberal, I criticized some things on the left, and suddenly I'm a known right-wing activist. And so I think we have to stop speaking in these hyperbolic, exaggerated terms, right? And that's part of it. The way we talk to each other, the way we talk about each other has gotten so ugly, right? It's just about mudslinging. We don't talk anymore. We don't have dialogues, and we have to. I mean, we really, really have to. And we have to listen. We have to listen to people. We have to understand. I mean, listen, I didn't vote for Trump, but I know a lot of good people who did. And it was important to me to talk to those people and understand why. Why you're this good person. You are somebody who fights against racism. You are this amazing person. What made you vote for Trump? Because I don't get it. But once you start talking to people and listening, you start to see their perspective, and that changes things. And so we have to do more of that.
Absolutely. This podcast is cylinder radio, the idea of different perspectives to try and get a 3D view of things. The calling out your own side strengthens your side. It doesn't weaken it. I think that's a big mistake that people are seeing here, is they think if they call out the negatives in their side that it weakens them. It's the opposite. If your side is only getting called out by the other side, then it makes you look unaware. So calling it out and then saying, I know we have these things wrong with us, but despite that, we have these things right with us, and the right is better than what's right about us is better than what's wrong about us. And I think it just strengthens you, but we don't. And along those same lines, the last question I'll ask you is, I'm a huge fan of steel man positions as opposed to straw man positions.
Yes.
So how would you best steel man the idea that teachers should be activists?
Well, I mean, there's also maybe Angel Eduardo. He actually talks about star man.
The last episode of my podcast was with Angel. Yeah.
Oh, it was. Okay. He's so great. I think he's wonderful. And, it's not so different from steel manning, but I think what's really important is the idea of, finding, I don't want to say finding the good, because that's so cheesy and it's so cliche, but finding something positive about the other person's argument. So about this idea that, of teachers as activists. Activists are passionate about something, right? And that is important, right? Because, something that I always wanted for my students, something that I want for my son, I want him to be passionate about something. I want him to care deeply about something. And I think that in many cases, activism does come from this place of caring, of passion, of wanting to do the right thing. So, I would say that, in cases where it's coming from that place, that can be a good thing, but that can also be channeled into creating a bigger circle, creating a bigger dialogue, a grander conversation that's actually going to make the world a better place, and not just my group a bigger, stronger group.
Yeah, I love that. Monica Osborne, thank you so much. Where can people keep up with your work? See, read the things that you put out and everything like that. You on social media? How do people?
Yeah. I'm on Twitter at Dr. Monica Osborne. So I post pieces there, and I'm all over the place.
Okay, yeah, just Google and Jewish Journal. All of our articles will come up, and I highly recommend if you haven't seen it, this one about activism and teaching. Check it out. There's probably a lot of commentary out on the interwebs where you can get dip your toe in if you want to. Um, Monica Osborne, thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed the conversation.
You. This is great. Thanks so much for having me.